top of the day, and good morning to some and good afternoon to others. We're closing out today's session with something I've looked forward to for a while. The IBM Food Trust is something that really opened the eyes of a lot of people as to what blockchain could do. As we were chatting beforehand, been involved in blockchain since the very beginning of this stuff, and it never would have occurred to me to do things like this. So the innovation is just amazing what's coming out. So I'm going to introduce Gokul here, and I will then disconnect, and he's going to share some stories about that, and then I will come back with questions that have come in. So Gokul's been with the IBM Food Trust since it started, since the very inception of it, and helped initial pilot at Walmart, which we hear about around here quite a bit. So you can think of all of the challenges that must have come from this, and hopefully we'll hear about some of those things because we didn't really have standards or template for doing this. His background is he's been with IBM for quite a while, PhD out of Penn State in 2004. He's been very active in research and many papers and patents and the things you would expect IBM top researchers to produce. So we're delighted to have him, and he and I could chat about these sorts of things for a very long time, but I will let the higher value occur here. So all yours, Gokul. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Thanks for the kind introduction. Are you able to hear me well?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So, I wanted to just start off telling the story, right? I mean, it was 4 or 5 years ago that, we got in touch with Walmart, and literally there were a few of them. Actually, Frank Yanis, who is now the Deputy Commissioner of FDA, but he and his team came to Yorktown, IBM Research, where we were discussing on supply chain problems, and traceability was a problem. He said that, when he wants to find the origin of a food, with the number of phone calls, with going through papers and the whole process, it took them 1 week, right? To find out, for example, mangoes were coming from Mexico and a particular spot or a particular place, right? So we wanted to solve the problem, and at that time, blockchain was something. It was new technology. I mean, it was there since it was there much more in the finance sector, but it has never been brought into other industries. And so, 2016, we started thinking about it, and it seemed such a natural fit for a supply chain, right? Because we really look at it, blockchain requires many parties, transactional, and supply chain has all that stuff. So I'm going to spending some time on IBM Food Trust, the product that we developed over the past few years. And now it's also called blockchain transparent supply, because it's the product is not just limited to food. It can be applied to a variety of industries. We have a tire network, we have wine networks, we have so some of the other coffee and farmer networks, and I'm going to be talking about some of these. So we have all these networks that are being built, and the base for that and the technology, the core technology, what we call the IBM Food Trust initial, is what I'm going to be spending some time on. Right? So, so I'll spend a little time on IBM Food Trust itself and kind of expand to other, before I expand to other industries. The main thing here is that so many people die every year because of foodborne illnesses. Literally, it's like 400,000, right? And 1/3 of the food gets wasted, 1/3 of fresh food. So is there something we can do to solve this problem? Because this is happening because of inefficiencies in supply chain, lack of procedures and standardization to share data easily. When there's so many parties, if you look at, let's say, berries or something like that, starts from a farm, they go to a supplier, and then from there to a distributor, and then a retailer and a store. So there's supply chain that's involved here. And how do we get an end-to-end view of such a supply chain? And then, first of all, so that's the first thing. Can we get the visibility? And second, on top of that, can we do optimizations such as reducing the waste through rerouting or redirecting, right? And similarly, when an incident happens, let's say FDA comes up with an announcement saying, hey, this particular product from this location has been contaminated, or it has salmonella virus. So please don't consume it. So if FDA comes up with these kinds of notifications, and how do we absorb them into system immediately and quickly track down where the food is going? So that's the problem we are trying to solve. So, because what happened before, this kind of solution, let's say FDA gave some notice, the typical retailers and suppliers, they would throw away all the product, right? There was no procedure to do something called a surgical recall, where you track down that food from certain place is actually going to certain other places, and the remaining places are safe. There was no way to make that statement. So we are on the way to in that we are going in that direction, and we built a product which you can use for trace, for recalls, and to handle such scenarios, and in future for inventory, for freshness, and for other optimizations, right? So if you look at our journey, so initially we did a small pilot in 2016, as I was saying, with Walmart, and this was on mangoes from Mexico and pork from China. And the key thing there was we wanted to build the same system that can tackle multiple products and multiple processes. So that is independent of however long the supply chain may be, or however short it is, or however simple or complex it is. We want to be able to ingest the data and map and weave together the entire supply chain. So that was our goal, and therefore the initial pilot itself was very diverse. In pork supply chain is very different from mango supply chain. There's a lot of processing on the pork side, and then mangoes are very simple, just packing. And the one is from Mexico, one is from China. So we did that, and we successfully demonstrated that. And then we said, okay, let's expand it to more and more players. So later we onboarded some of these companies, Dole, Briscoe, Nestle, and so on. And then by 2018, we started devising onboarding ways, virtual onboarding ways, where companies could come and onboard themselves, or we would have offerings to successfully onboard them. And standards play a critical role here, and I'm going to be talking about that as well a little later. And so right now we have about 300 plus organizations on IBM Food Trust. Some of them are very large companies, some of them are smaller companies, small farms, and so on. They are all sharing data, and or individually they're sharing data, and blockchain becomes that layer to collect all the data and put together this end-to-end trace using identifiers such as product identifiers, facility identifiers, lot number identifiers, and so on. Okay. So what is the value of building such a blockchain? The interesting thing is this data sharing mechanism, first of all, gives you trust. As most of you might know, blockchain, if there's one word I would use for the business community to kind of equal to blockchain, that is trust, right? It's a technology that is now giving you trust because you can detect if data is tampered. And so it's allowing you to see tamper-proof data. And then there is real-time component to it. So as soon as you put in some data, other parties will be able to see the data. And so things and insights can be done in a trustable manner in real time. So as a result, different parties can benefit. So for example, in this case, farmers typically don't know what how they are doing, or how whether it's a way for them to inform themselves to the consumers. For example, they may have done some good sustainable practices and so on in actually building a crop or farming. And then this will give you a platform. The farmer could put in all the details, and then the end consumers who are buying it in the stores can actually see those details, right? So it's a way for farmer to kind of improve their brand and strengthen their customer loyalty. So growers and farmers can really benefit. Food manufacturers can benefit too. So from their point of view, again, They can monitor if goods are coming in, when are they leaving, and then they know the supply chain, how many goods are there at the next, next point of receiving, and then based on that they can control their inventory management, right? And they can share documents and certificates that can be seen by the consumers and so on. Similarly, and in the end, they can build brand too, right? Doing all these practices. Wholesalers can again, do the same thing. They can benefit from recalls. They can because they can do tracing and recall in real time. And the key thing is everybody benefits in terms of cost, because when something like a trace happens, today there is no way to know that, oh, this particular bag of spinach, or there was no way to know that this particular bag of spinach came from this place and therefore it's safe, whereas the other one came from California, which is now which is being told that it's on the contamination list, and so we need to remove all the products that are coming from California. So to make those kinds of decisions, there was no single system, and that's what this can enable, right? So wholesalers and distributors can benefit. Logistic providers can benefit. They can do things like rerouting to maintain freshness, right? They can work with real-time inventory management, visibility, and so on. And all these parties can also benefit in terms of compliance and regulation, because when bodies, audit bodies or regulatory bodies want to come and do audits, then they need to provide documentation of products, of certificates, etc. And that becomes very easier if things are shared on a distributed ledger and if there is trust. And that's where blockchain can help, right? Because of the trust. And finally, if you talk about retailers, they can really build their brand with consumers. From a consumer point of view, I would like to go and know where the mangoes or the tomatoes I'm buying are coming from. Are they truly organic? Are there certificates associated with these products, right? And I'm assured that this does not belong to a lot number that has been recalled. So these are the kinds of information that one can get in a trustable way using this kind of, if we build this kind of ecosystem, right? We have won many awards over the years in terms of IBM Food Trust. So this just shows a few. I'm not going to spend much time here. So, trust and transparency, right? They kind of bring a lot of value, such as traceability and connected ecosystem where everybody shares data with one another to further build that value is kind of the crux of the solution that we are building. We want to give value to everybody. Today, data is very siloed. Retailer had their own systems, suppliers have their own systems, farmer has his own Excel spreadsheet, right? If we were to have a common way, a standardized way for each of these players to retrieve relevant data, right, and put it in a standard way on a blockchain, then we could take care of connecting them and showing visibility to everybody in a permissioned way, right? In a permissioned way, that's a key thing, because as one puts data, one can control what needs to be shown and what does not need to be shown, right? So that's where success, I think, is in terms of a blockchain network truly, truly blooming. So here are some of the examples. These names are well known. Carrefour is a very big retailer in Europe, and they work with us. And essentially, as soon as you scan a QR code, the trace can be seen by the consumers who shop there, and they know that it's like antibiotic free and so on. So in fact, Carrefour saw a good uptick in consumer response and sales and so on. Walmart, we worked closely with Walmart on the Leafy Green initiative, where their desire was to make sure that the suppliers who are actually submitting the data submit data all the way to the farm, right? Farmer Connect, I'll be spending a little time on this later, but this is where we kind of replicated the whole IBM Food Trust network for coffee industry, where we provided ways for end consumers like us who consume coffee to directly tip the farmer. So information is not just flowing one way, right? So farmer shares information and the middlemen the roasters and so on, they share information and the consumer gets to see that. But at the same time, because the connectivity is established on the platform, now a consumer can actually tip the farmer directly. So that way we can actually enable and contribute to the sustainability of farmers. And we also work with Golden State Foods, and these are all public. These are public information where we actually started monitoring temperature through sensors like RFIDs and so on, and then you can track and you can get alerts when certain cold chain product such as some meat product is the thresholds of the temperature are crossed, right? It needs to be stored in certain specific temperature range, and if the temperature crosses that range, we can get alerts, and we can trust the data because it's coming from a blockchain. So let me spend a few minutes on the architecture as well, kind of a little bit technical, and I'll show a demo and I'll come back to this, right? So this is how, this is more like an architectural view, right? So there are various parties who are actually submitting data in a standardized way, right? We can provide trace, we can provide, they can submit documents which we can store, they can get insights. So we already built a few applications as an example applications on top of the platform. And, but at the same time, data can be retrieved using APIs. So it's up to the end consumers of the platform in terms of building their own applications, right? So we also provide ways to build your own applications and to power the whole ecosystem. So these are our applications that we provide by default, what we call modules, and then you can build your own apps as well. And here is a more data view on this. So if you really look at here, there are suppliers and farmers, and there are retailers, and there's like retail store. So a lot of data exchange typically happens in supply chain before blockchain. And so what blockchain can do is, you can see all those orange boxes below. Those refer to different kind of supply chain events. For example, a farmer or a supplier could have created particular lot number. For example, they're manufacturing a product, right? So that can be called as a commission event in GS1 terminology. Similarly, you have observation, aggregation, ship events, receive events, and all that. So all those events are put on are sent to IBM Food Trust platform individually by each of these entities, and we take care of connecting all that to form end-to-end trace. On the left, you can see that the data can also be categorized as master data, which is data of products and facilities, which are much more static in nature. Then there's transaction data, which is more like purchase orders, ASNs or dispatch advice, and so on. And then there's event data, which is actually supply chain events where, for example, tomatoes being harvested, commission event. They are put into cases, packing event. Cases are put into pallets, aggregation, another packing event. Pallet is shipped to a supplier, ship event, and the supplier has a receive event. And the supplier has transformed these tomatoes to ketchup, transformation event, right? And there could be many ingredients there. And then from there, the ketchup is again packaged, packing event, and it's sent to a store or retailer, and from there to a store, a receive event, and then displaying on the shelf. And you can even imagine a checkout event when an actual consumer buys it, right? So these are all various events of the supply chain, and this is what we call event data. So we are getting these data, and today, I mean, literally we have millions of records on IBM Food Trust platform. Tens of thousands come in every day from all the entities that are onboarded onto the platform, and continuously the backend processes are working to connect all the data and to form trace, to gather insights, and to provide data in terms of APIs so that partners can derive their own insights. I do want to mention a few statements on the GS1, because GS1 is a standards body that has been focused and that has worked a lot on supply chain standards for the past 25 plus years. And some of the event types and transaction types, most of them what we have taken are actually from GS1. We are aligned with GS1. and because they have done all the work in terms of what are the various attributes that an event should have. For example, what, where, when, and why. What refers to what is the product, what is the lot number, where is it happening, when, what is the timestamp, and why. So what is the business context around it? So by capturing these four what, where, when, why attributes, and by standardizing the way that needs to be input into the platform, we made it easy for all the ecosystem to input data and to actually share data and to even receive data from that other parties are submitting. So these are various modules on IBM Food Trust, right? And what I'm going to do now is quickly switch to a small demo. Are you able to see this, Dan?
I still see the slides.
Okay.
Oh, now I see us.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, yep, you're good now.
Awesome. So this is, so I just logged into IBM Food Trust portal, and this is an organization's point of view when they actually log into IBM Food Trust, right? And so the base page shows you, number of users in the organization, facilities, products, and there's a few graphs, how the trace is being used, logins, and and so on. And the various modules, as I mentioned, right? There is a data module where you can actually go and see what are the various products that have been uploaded, what are the facilities. You can actually upload data using spreadsheets. Right? So I'm not going to go through every detail because I want to focus a little more on the trace module where you can actually see end-to-end supply chain. And then there is document modules. We'll come back to that. So let's go towards trace. So here, this is typically, you can imagine this being used by a retailer or a supplier or even a farmer, where they want to enter a product name and maybe a lot number if they have, and they want to trace and see who are all the people who have actually touched this product, where has all it been, how much quantity was produced, how much was consumed, and things like that. So I'm going to choose a product. It's a product for baby food. It's called Good for Baby's Backyard Veggies. And I have option to give a lot number or a serial number or a pallet number, right? And so on. I can even choose a date range if you want to limit the search to a given dates, right? Or an expiration date if the product has an expiration date and so on. In this case, I'm going to do a direct trace without giving much information. So now what is happening is the system it has been given a request at the back end, and the system is finding out what are all the entities who have touched this product, and not just this product, the ingredients that go into this product and the ingredients that go into those, and so on, right? So it'll trace the entire supply chain for you, and it's going to display as it retrieves. And what you can see here is that trace essentially has a few components. So on the top is a timeline. So this timeline essentially represents the timeline from the first date of any ingredient that went into a product to the final date of any event associated with the product, such as it being displayed on a retail store or it being checked out by consumer, right? So as I click on anything, for example, if I click on this peel and chunk apples here, you can see that the green marker shows up on the timeline. If I click on apples here, it shows up as red, right? So if I show anything, that particular. So that the reason for that is one can quickly see where this particular event has happened in the timeline to get detail, to get more details about it. And then one can, you can see there are various columns here. So, and the first two columns say fresh produce here, first 4 columns, and the last 2 columns say it shows neighborhood stores, as I highlighted here, right? And here it says fresh produce. This basically shows that this data was actually submitted by 2 different organizations on IBM Food Trust, right? And so, and permission was given to share, and there's no limit. Any number of organizations can submit data, and we can weave the trace together, right? Now let's look into a little bit detail of what we mean by trace. So this is called a supply chain view. Before I go a little bit deeper into it, let me also show something called a product view. So this is the actual process. So there were apples that are harvested, right, with certain lot numbers. Apples were converted to peeled and chunked apples, and with this particular lot number L111, right, and that was then converted to apple puree, right? And similarly, we had sweet potatoes, carrots, squash, and other that were also converted to the chunks and then to puree. And finally, we had the product we searched for. That was a result of a combination of these 4 different purees. So this is kind of is the supply chain process view. And as you hover here, you can see each of the details of a particular event, right? And now we can go back to the supply chain view with that understanding. And suppose I'm interested in really knowing, hey, where are these apples actually coming from? So you can go back and see where the farm is, right? And what was commissioned, and when was the packing done, and when was it sent? What was the pallet number? So in this case, from this particular farm on this date to this particular facility, apples in 200 cases of this lot L124 were sent, right? Similarly, you can have information for others as well. And then at some point, the apples were received, and I'm not going to click through every detail. I think you get the gist of it. We can have transformation events. For example, sweet potatoes were input into this particular event, and the output product was chunked sweet potatoes, right? And similarly, that was input, and cooked sweet potato chunks were output. So you can have transformation events like that. And so I'm not clicking on everything, but I just show the final product that we put in. The different purees you can see as inputs. So much quantity got combined to create an output product. And then the output product was actually sent to a different facility. So you can have details about packing, unpacking, right? And this was associated with the purchase order number. You can click and see the details of purchase order number. So, and then finally it was at store, right? And again, there's a warehouse, and so on. And I'm not going to go through everything, but it's received at this store from this DC2001 on this particular date. And here is its purchase order number. And this was in California. So the summary is that, you can have an end-to-end view of entire supply chain for any product, right? And so you can specify using lot number, date range, and so on. And that is something that is very difficult to do without this kind of a system. And blockchain has become a platform to enable that, because now parties are sharing with each other, and they know that they can trust this data, right? Because it's tamper-proof. So when something like a recall happens, you can do this trace back, or you can even do trace forward. You can take one of the ingredients like apples and do the same search and do trace forward, and you can reach all the way to store and know where all those apples went. So that can really speed up the recall time and actually save lives, right? And also save cost, because today retailers throw away everything on the shelf because it takes some time for them to really understand and get this information in today's systems. And by the time people could be getting affected. So today, everything's thrown off the shelf. Retailers immediately act and then suppliers side, and as soon as they receive a notice, and they remove everything from the shelf. Whereas this technology can, as I said, make one do it in a very pointed way, what we call a surgical recall, right? And then there this can also be used to share certificates and things like that. For example, there's something called documents, right? So here I'm going to show you a documents module where you can see a bunch of documents is here. So these are like certificates, different and then produced by testing, produced by various farms sometimes, or third-party providers who go test a fixed facility and certify that it's something is called organic, those kinds of things. So as part of trace, you can also display this information, and one can share this with other parties as well, right? So here is another example I'm going to quickly touch in a second before I move on to other. So this is another trace for another product, and basically as part of the trace, you can see that certificate also has been brought out because this was associated with that product at particular time, and then therefore when the trace was being queried, it's not just events but also documents associated with the events and so on. So that's what we call a document module. And so let me go back to the presentation, and Dan, since I have 15 more minutes, I will, let's pause for any questions, and then if needed, I'll continue.
Sadly, I was hoping there wouldn't be any questions so I could ask them all, but we actually have about 10 questions here and some very good questions. So I will have to take mine offline with you later. But if you're ready to take some now, I can share some with you now. Or
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you. And Frank Ganis, who you mentioned, was alumni of University of South Florida, and when I was down on faculty there, he'd come down and help us with our blockchain effort. And he lived up here at the time, of course, with Walmart. But it's if you trace back what you and he had accomplished with this stuff, we're working now, our supply chain, or our blockchain center here is working with China and their food blockchain. And I was in New Delhi in February working with the Indian government as they try to set up food traceability. And it's really, if you think back of what you and Frank have accomplished through this, the whole thing's going global, and it's all traceable to your experimentation and your struggling through and so on. So I'm very grateful for that. I watched some of what you're doing, and I think my wife teaches elementary school. What a great way to learn the world, for a kid. You got some blueberries from Peru, and you could trace through and go back and even eventually show a video of a family picking blueberries in Peru. It would be a great way for young kids to meet other kids around the world. So I think there's great potential well beyond what it's used for right now. And I do hope it becomes something that we all sort of participate in as if it, a social network of some kind, but great way to meet people from other countries. It's all in place. Let me go through some questions.
Dan. I just want to say, as we take questions, people can feel free to open their iPhone cameras and scan that barcode there. So this is more of what you call Farmer Connect. So, I was giving that example of actually the farmer, the consumer having ability to tip the farmer. So it will open up that particular so-called application, and you can see, you can donate and so on. But it's not about that. It's just to show the capability that, we have launched Farmer Connect.
I'm on it. I do that in the grocery store all the time, by the way, because it's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, unfortunately, we have excellent questions here and way more than we can get to. But let me start them. Matthew asks, is there a minimum amount of product that a farmer needs to produce in order to be included in the system?
No, there is no minimum amount of product that needs to be produced.
Okay, so it's not a technology just geared toward big corporate farms. Anybody can participate in it.
We have small farmers who are also participating, and a lot of times, in fact, farmers actually had a small barrier initially because they had to get identifiers with GS1, which means they had to pay. So we work with GS1. GS1 simplified, and they have a small offering. And we also have ways to create identifiers for farmers, which are just IBM Food Trust identifiers. So absolutely no problem. There's no constraint on the size of the farm.
Very nice. Okay, here's a question. Tracing food in supply chain management increases safety and quality. Does blockchain help solve the problem of supply chain issues such as bullwhip, supply chain bullwhip effects. So is this information, because MBAs often will play what's called the beer game, I think Deloitte invented, to show inventory problems. Um, so is this something that can help address some of these inventory issues?
Absolutely. Food safety was the first use case we started with. However, imagine the key thing here is the data, the connected data across all these different entities, right? Which was never there before. Now that's possible, right? And hence that opens up a host of analytics, inventory management, tracking of freshness, right? And rerouting, as I was mentioning. Similarly, analytics, prediction, forecasting, right? Supply chain demand, and then basically you want to see, you know that, hey, I may run out of the product. What can I do? Sometimes I don't have any more supplies. I can reach out to new suppliers. Can even enable those. And on the finance side, real-time payments. So as soon as I receive something, I can click the payment automatically can be done. Partial payments can be done as something is moves through supply chain, because capital is a big concern for some of these suppliers. Retailers pay them after a while. And similarly, dispute resolution, that's another one, right? So there are a host of use cases that this data can power. One of them is we started with food safety, but then absolutely inventory, those kinds of cases we have. In fact, we have a module that's ready, that's coming out, which will focus on supply chain insights, things like inventory, things like freshness, and so on.
Excellent. Wow. I mean, I would have loved to have this kind of data 25 years ago. I mean, here's a question on data. It says, since data in the blockchain is visible between the company and its business partners, how does the company address privacy issues, and who owns the data in the ledgers and who can access it?
Great question. Yeah. So that's what we mean by governance, right? So if you take IBM Food Trust, we have a governance body. So some of the big retailers and GS1, they're all on the governance body. It's called Advisory Council of IBM Food Trust, right? And first of all, technology-wise, there you can put data and you can permission. Whoever puts the data, he owns the data, whichever entity, number one. And number two, there are various permissioning modes. You can explicitly mention a partner and share data with them, or you can say this is public, or you can say this is transactional, which means in only those parties who are ever involved in a transaction that touches this data will be able to see this data, right? Let's say you put data on tomatoes that's going to a retailer, and the retailer sold it to, let's say a distributor, and the distributor sold it to retailer. So only that distributor and that retailer will be able to see this data on tomatoes, whereas some other data that you send to some other retailer will not be visible to them. So we have different kinds of modes of permissioning, and the governance body kind of is aware of that. And in general, it gives suggestions and directions, right? So it's handled both at the business and the technical level.
Very nice. Wow, my mind is racing with all kinds of opportunities. I mean, I live next to a guy who was a fruit buyer South and Central America, and I said, the green grapes out of Peru are really good this year, but they're not very good out of Chile. He says, "Oh, supply chain problems."
So Dan, since you're excited, you should join us.
Here's the next question. So we're involved in poultry tracing, and we're starting up some grant work in pork tracing. And the question is, what are the challenges, the comparative challenges that you face when tracking mangoes versus pork on a blockchain? So how is the product, what are the challenges of different products?
Yeah. So, initially, when we first hit upon, we saw that the chains were a bit different, right? Mangoes typically they don't undergo major transformations. Sometimes they just put into the case, and the case straight goes to store, right? Sometimes they are peeled and cut and packed into smaller chunks. Whereas pork, pigs, right, from pigs to the big wogs, the big cuts, and from there to packaged cuts, then into casing, pallets, and so there's a whole transformation supply chain. So initially it felt different, but the moment when we embrace standards, we saw that independent of the supply chain and the complexity, we were able to map to the standards vocabulary. There are essentially 6 types of events, right? Commission, decommission, aggregation, disaggregation, transformation, and observation. Every supply chain, we were able to map to these 6. And that those 6 we came up with, GS1 came up with after discussing with many partners over many years. So, however, in terms of challenges, so in terms of data mapping, I think we were able to solve it. In terms of challenges, it was more things like we were working with a poultry manufacturer, and what happened was, a certain quantity would go in, right, into the transformation process, and new products were created. But then, if the quality is not good, the part that remaining quantity would come back and put into the same chain, in some sense leading to loops and cycles at times. So those are some of the challenges we had to deal with. And the second thing was data availability at times. Accurate quantities of data are sometimes not known. And then things like certificates, they have to be scanned and uploaded. So digitization was also like a little bit of challenge sometimes. But for many major corporations, it was solved.
Excellent. Next question says, infrastructure. What level of internet reliability or interconnectedness would agricultural producers need to make this level of traceability possible? I was a architect at John Deere, and I know we had some of these in the field connectivity sort of challenges. I imagine you had even more so.
No, definitely. But at the same time, I think on the spirit of the question, I just want to take a step back and say it's not necessary to actually host a node and have infrastructure to participate in the ecosystem. You can be a simple farmer. You can sign up on your mobile, and you can have a spreadsheet with populate some data, and you can upload it. So all you need is like a computer, literally, right, to actually participate in the ecosystem and upload data and even see the trace, right? At the same time, there are big corporations. For example, you're working with a big corporation now in provision, and they actually want to provision a node by Ibm Food Trust, right? So we're in the process of doing that. So that definitely requires some infrastructure and and some responsibility, because the moment a party has its own blockchain node, now data from other parties is going to come and sit here, even though it's fully encrypted. There's a question of responsibility there, and liability. So one has to carefully work through the legal issues there, which is something, and that's what is taking a little bit time as well as we provision this, right? So those are some of the things. But in terms of network bandwidth and so on, all I would say is high performance network with nodes, and our whole platform runs on top of Hyperledger Fabric. And so in deploying this node for this big corporation, we are actually deploying it in phases, deploying lower level blockchain first, and top of that, IBM blockchain platform, and top of that Food Trust components. So there is definitely that level of infrastructure and maintenance capability that's needed.
Thank you. Quick question, and then a longer, and then I'll have to cut it off at that point. But how many supply chain points do you have for mangoes and pork products in your product? How many participants? How many? You may have had that in your slides.
I mean, overall, we have right now more than 300. I don't know if it's 350, but somewhere between 300 and 350 organizations onboarded to IBM Food Trust. And in terms of data is in millions and millions of records, right? Where each record is like a supply chain event. I do not exactly know how many of them are farmers or leafy green farmers or pork farmers. But I can tell you some of these are major corporations. Many of these are mid-sized, and some of them are smaller farmers as well. So it's a very diverse spectrum.
Okay, this will be the last question, and I'll have to close up. How does the different international food industry regulations impact the effectiveness of the IBM Food Trust and the produce that makes it to market? So what have you learned? I'm sure a great deal about regulation and international commerce.
Great question. So actually, we did a pilot with a government agency. I don't know if I can tell the name, but with government agency where products were being exported to other countries, and there were regulations there, right? So there were two ways. One is, yes, you can express some of these regulations in the long term, even a smart contract and so on. But also, we are doing work. We went through the regulations, and essentially, we are actually developing a rule engine where you can write rules in a natural language like manner. So you can say, if this product is this and it was produced before this date and later, then you cannot ship, things like that, right? You can write rules, and those rules can then run on the data and can enable such agencies to quickly check whether all the data is compliant or not, right? So we are doing those kinds of checks, and we are also actively talking with regulatory bodies who have keen interest in really partnering with us and helping us guide this, and it's vice versa, right? We are also working with them and help them guide on the technology, so that we're hoping to reach a convergence point where we will know that, hey, these are the regulations, this is how we need to handle, because in finance world a lot of that work actually has been done.
Well, very nice. Well, thank you very much. I have to say I have a son who's a senior in analytics, not at Arkansas. He is going to school where he went to high school. Um, and he got a call from an IBM recruiter. He says, "Dad, have you heard of IBM before?" And it's like, "Yeah, I think I've heard of IBM." It's where I learned to program in Fortran on the 3090 long ago. And he says, "Well, they do some really interesting things." He said, "They've got a quantum machine, which looks like a big jellyfish." He said, "They do this IBM Watson thing, and it looks like they're doing that blockchain thing. So apparently you can eat Bitcoins now." I said, "Well, it's a little bit more than that."
No, but I think great point. And first of all, thanks a lot. I would like to thank you for providing this opportunity, because we are out of time, right? 12:30, I think.
Yeah,
so thanks a lot for providing the opportunity and being an awesome host. And yes, you will see hopefully in future, very not too far maybe, chain data on top of it, AI, right? That convergence, definitely.
Yeah, we have a conversation tomorrow about that. I need to send you a journal announcement on that topic, AI and blockchain. So we'll have a conversation on that tomorrow in the breakout session as well. Well, thank you again very much. This is fabulously interesting. And for those of you online, I think this closes out today's session. So we'll be back early tomorrow morning. And I'm grateful for you and for what IBM's done for all of higher education, but in particular for our blockchain center. And it's just inspiring. And the students, they get this, they get goosebumps, and they're like, "Wow, I can actually make a difference in the world." So I appreciate all your help. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I agree. And that gives me great satisfaction as well, that we are making a difference in the world. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Okay. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye.